Curlin, who is our program chair, who will introduce our speaker. Karen, the floor is yours.
Everyone, I am thrilled and honored to have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Bernd Wollschlaeger as our guest speaker today. Dr. Wollschlaeger was born, raised, and educated in Germany. He was the Christian son of a decorated World War II Nazi tank commander. Bernd was raised to believe that the Holocaust never happened. But the 1972 Olympic Games massacre of the Israeli athletes in Munich changed all of that. It sent him on a quest to get answers, to understand the legacy of his nation, his family, and particularly his father, who had kept his dark past a secret from them. Driven by a curiosity to learn about the Holocaust, he studied and explored Judaism, ultimately becoming a Jew by choice, emigrating to Israel, and serving in the Israeli Defense Forces. Dr. Wollschlaeger now lives in Miami, Florida, where he is a practicing family physician, noted speaker, and author. Today, Dr. Wollschlaeger will share his story with us. So fasten your seatbelts, everyone. We're going for an amazing ride.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the voice is there. Well, thank you for inviting me, virtually or non-virtually. We can talk. If there's an echo in the back, please let me know so that you understand. So far, I had no problem with my computer, but it can happen. Well, why am I speaking about my life? Well, definitely not because I want to be unbelievably famous. Definitely not because I feel it's very strongly to promote myself. I'm speaking for another reason at all. I want to speak about how people can change and how you can need to adjust your thinking about other people and other cultures, going from the we to the me, meaning understand us as an individual. Because I'm Jewish, I'm an Israeli, I served in the combat unit of the Israeli army as a medical officer, but my father was a Nazi and I was not born Jewish. And during this time that I've in my life, I often had to justify myself how that is possible. I don't have to do it anymore. I'm just telling my story and everybody can make up his own mind or her own mind if that's what I'm doing is appropriate or not. So how did it all start? It started when my son Tal, he's now 32 years old. He's an attorney. I cried over it, but it's over. In the age of 14, 15, asked me a very simple question. And that question shouldn't be a problem to answer for anybody. He asked me, Dad, who is my grandfather? Well, for me, that was a problem, as you can imagine, because how do I explain a nice Jewish boy going to Jewish schools, Jewish education, that his father, his grandfather is a National Socialist, and his father, even though Jewish, converted to Judaism for the reasons that I'm going to tell you. So I found it too complicated to explain, but slowly but surely I decided to tell him. And the story that I told him is, of course, the framework in which I tell you my story too, but there are news here and there because I'm doing it for such a long time that more and more information I can aggregate and integrate into my story. So how did it all start? Well, it started out at the time and the place and the country I was born in and born at. I was born in Bamberg, Germany. It's actually, Bamberg is nestled between Würzburg and Nuremberg in the north of Bavaria, a gorgeous city. And when the tourism blockade is over, please visit this city. It's 1,000 years old, untouched by any wars. It's literally soaked with history, modeled after Rome. On every mountain is a church, a central cathedral, 1,000 years old. So as children, we walked through this our city, and our teachers told us and impressed upon us to learn everything about that history and who lived where and what pope and what queen and king. But there was something funny, not because I was smarter than others. I was about 8 years old, something like that, when I noticed that even though we learned a lot about history, but certain aspects of history were not talked about. I figured out, and most of us knew, that there was a war, because in our city of 75,000, there were about 10,000 American soldiers and 5,000 family members living among us. And I figured in the war, people win and people lose. And the fact that we have American soldiers in the city, meaning we didn't win that one. That's all what I knew about that war. I also knew that the war impacted my family, our family, tremendously, because when I asked my father and my mother about my grandparents, they told me they're gone because of the war, and they wouldn't talk about it. So I found it strange that war impacted in our society, shattered the foundation of our society, helped to rebuild a new country, but nobody wanted to talk about it. Slowly but surely, my father and my mother started to talk about it because I was nudging them. I was a nerd, and I was completely, I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand what happened. And when my father and my mother started to talk about it, I heard two different stories. My father told me on long walks that we had on Sundays in the forest. He was a hunter. He was guiding me how to shoot, use a weapon, how to fish. And my father was a very strong influence upon me. And these long walks that we had, he told me over and over again, once he got going, that he was the youngest tank commander in the German army, serving under the command of General Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg. And he, as the youngest tank commander, everywhere where Germany attacked and went into attack, my father's tanks were the first to roll in. September the 1st, 1939, the attack on Poland, my father's tanks were the first to roll in. Following year, 1940, the attack on France, Holland, Belgium, my father's tanks were the first to roll in. And then, of course, the infamous or famous Operation Barbarossa, the attack on the former Soviet Union in 1941, my father was first rolling in, not only rolling in, but reaching a town on the way towards Moscow called Orel, which he conquered with just a few tanks into his disposition. And for that unbelievable accomplishment, he was awarded the Knight's Cross by a man whom he still adoringly referred to as his Führer, Adolf Hitler. Now, I had no idea what Adolf Hitler was, not because I escaped history, but I didn't hear about that. I never heard about it. But that my father had a Knight's Cross around the neck that he was proudly presenting in family affairs, Christmas, when friends came over. I was proud about him, the knight in shining armor. And my parents, my father invited friends over at least once a year, and they celebrated the good old times, all their officers. And they impressed upon me to appreciate my father as their hero. And so for myself, my father was a hero. On the other hand, my mother told me a completely different story, though, the story of horror, of terror. She was an ethnic German, born and raised in Czechoslovakia in the Sudetenland. These were Sudeten German, living for hundreds of years in the territory along the western border of Czechoslovakia, in the eastern border of Germany. And as a result, she was born in a very wealthy family. My maternal grandfather was a glove merchant, and they could afford to have a beautiful villa with beautiful life. And as a result of the war, they had to flee towards the east, leaving everything in the west, leaving everything behind. And my grandparents, because of the stress of the brutal escape, died soon thereafter. So glory and horror, two worlds that I had to deal with. But there was something else, something peculiar. We were living in a massive building in downtown Bamberg. It's still standing. It's patrician style building, huge, solid. The entire upper floor was occupied by the landlady. And my mother instructed me, do not talk to the lady unless spoken to. She's a noblewoman. I didn't know what noblewoman is, but I shouldn't talk to her. Okay. And in the hallway, right next to the entrance of our apartment, right in the hallway next to the stairway that leading up to the countess's apartment, was a larger than life picture of a man mounted on the wall, looking like my father in uniform, whose pictures I saw at home. Officers in jacket, officers in Sigma, the officer's cap, the Knight's Cross around his neck. And when I asked my father who this man was or who he represents, my father looked at me and said, he was a traitor, and don't ask me about him anymore. Well, the traitor was related to the lady upstairs. His name was Klaus Count von Stauffenberg, the German officer who tried to assassinate Hitler on the 20th of July, 1944, and unfortunately it failed, and he was executed with dozens of others the same night. And Count Klaus von Stauffenberg's widow, Nina von Stauffenberg, lived upstairs. She was arrested 2 days later. It was thrown in Ravensbrück in a concentration camp, thanks to the protective measures taken by officers loyal still to her husband. She survived. Her children were given up for adoption and then were transported to Buchenwald. They were rescued by a German officer, and they reunited in Bamberg, and in that house I grew up in. So there was something contradictory and something that my father wouldn't tell me. And whenever Sundays came around and my parents after lunch were tired, laid down, I sneaked upstairs to the Countess's apartment because she had grandchildren coming over on Sundays and they had all these cool toys and I could play with them. And I remember like yesterday, this apartment was wall to wall covered with pictures of her husband and herself in a form that definitely represented the love and caring for each other and not about horror and betrayal. So something is wrong that my father told me. Something is fishy. In school, about early 1970s, I was about 12 years old. We started to talk about the time that nobody wanted to talk about, 1933 to 1945. And in this time, we didn't know anything. We fully depended on what our teachers told us. And the stories that we got are approximately the following. The National Socialist Party won the last election in November 1932, and Adolf Hitler in January 1933 was appointed by a democratically elected government to be prime minister. And as a result, he immediately took office, but with the intention to destroy any democratic institutions in Germany of the Weimar Republic, which was a very weak democracy, but promising. And Adolf Hitler threw thousands of people in concentration camps when they're not complying with his orders. Germany started the Second World War in 1939. The Germany lost in 1945, and huff and puff, like the Huns, the Nazis disappeared. They came and disappeared. And in between, 50 million people died in the war. Among them, 6 million Jews as collateral damage of war. I had no idea what Jews were, but it sounded to me like a horrible history. And nothing about the Holocaust, nothing at all. And then 1972 came an event in Germany that changed Germany and that changed my life, the Olympics in Munich, or München as we call it. And that was supposed to demonstrate to the world that this is a different Germany, at least West Germany, the democratic Germany, with East Germany on the side, the communist Germany, which should demonstrate to the world that we are different. And we were different, so to say. We are not the Germany of 1936, where Hitler abused the Olympics for propaganda purposes. This was 1972, the democratic Germany. And for the first time in 1969, a democratically elected chancellor took power who was not in any way tainted by the past of Germany. All predecessors, including his predecessor that before Willy Brandt came to power, his name was Kurt Georg Kiesinger, was a former Nazi and was a member of the Nazi propaganda ministry. So, and in complete contrast, Willy Brandt was a socialist who had to flee Germany in 1933, escaped to Norway. When Norway was occupied, escaped to Sweden, and then came back to Germany in 1949, built up the Social Democratic Party, which won in a landslide in 1969. And as a first order in international affairs, he traveled to Poland on December 1970. And in front of the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, he sank on his knees, bowed his head, and asked for forgiveness. That was the first time ever that the world saw a German politician in that position, asking for forgiveness. And on the front page of our newspaper was this picture of him, Willy Brandt, on his knees. And my father was yelling and screaming, "Schau mal her, Bernd, wieder ein Verräter." Look, Bernd, again a traitor. Now I was confused. Wait a second. I was raised, my father was a Protestant and secular Protestant. My mother was an Orthodox Catholic, sent me to Orthodox kindergarten, Catholic kindergarten, Orthodox Catholic elementary school. I was an altar boy, supposedly become a priest. That didn't work out. And for me, in this education that I got from my mother, it was logically that this is a positive sign. Somebody's kneeling out of devotion on the floor in front of a memorial. Why is my father so mad? And the same chancellor with a tremendous moral standing in the Western world opened the Olympics to a great fanfare in Munich. And I remember it because my parents purchased the first TV. It was a beautiful August day, warm. My parents invited friends over, fine food, wine, cheese, snacks, and it was joyous atmosphere. And when the teams paraded into the stadium, everybody stood up and applauded. Hello, who, look at them. And then a team paraded into the stadium carrying a flag with a star inside. And in that moment, the adults didn't say a word. It was the do not ask the question moment. And I said, that's weird. This is just another team. I had no idea that it was the Israeli team. I had no idea what it means with this Magen David, the Star of David. But the reaction of the adults, they was kind of telling something is wrong. And then 10 days later, the catastrophe happened. The same team that so proudly presented their flag into the world in the stadium and so proudly marched behind their flag were brutally attacked by a group of Palestinian terrorists. We know now that they were guided by the East German Stasi state security service, provided with logistics and maybe even with weapons. And they attacked the Israelis in Konolitstraße, the living quarters of the international athletes, very poor security, and butchered 2 Israelis on the spot. It was not killing, butchered them, and the remainder were taken hostage. And the Olympics were supposed to come to a halt, but the head of the Olympic committee refused because these are just Jews. The German government immediately leaned heavily on this official, obviously was had a brown ideology, a National Socialist ideology. And the Minister of Interior, Genscher, ordered his immediate stop of the Olympics. He himself negotiated personally, face-to-face, with the terrorist leader. His name was Issa, and offered him, Issa, the terrorist, the entire German cabinet as hostages in lieu of the Israelis. Issa rejected that. He ordered and he demanded to be flown out with helicopters in the nighttime to a nearby military airport in Fürstenfeldbruck, and that the German Boeing 707 of the German military would fly them to an Arab country of their choice, where then in a huge ideological fanfare, the Israelis would exchange 230 or 250 Arab prisoners in Israeli prisons with the remaining Israeli athletes. Well, it played out in a different way. And I remember it beat by beat. In the nighttime, we saw on the TV 2 helicopters taking off from the Olympic Village. Each helicopter were the hostages and the terrorists, equally distributed, and a 3rd helicopter with security behind, flying to the nearby military airport, Fürstenfeldbruck, and then all hell broke loose. Firefight, explosion, nobody saw anything, it was gated, was closed. Firefight, explosion, night sky lift by explosion, and then suddenly after an hour plus, silence. And I remember this exhausted American journalist that turned towards the camera. He just said one word, one sentence, they're all gone. What happened? The German police tried to liberate the hostages. And the Israeli Mossad units under Tzvi Samir, the head of the Mossad at that time, with Mossad Kidon units, special units, begged the Germans that do not attack them. These are skilled warriors. They will prefer to die them and take everybody down to hell, but do not attack them. Let us do it. The Germans wanted to demonstrate that they can handle it. It was totally mishandled. And the remaining terrorists, were 3 or 4 alive during the firefight. One threw a hand grenade in a helicopter, which exploded, and the Israelis perished in a fireball. The other helicopter, they sprayed with machine gun fire, and everybody died. And then the next day, the picture that changed me and changed the world. Front page of every German newspaper. 2 helicopters on the tarmac, 1 helicopter burned out, with the charred remains of the Israelis visible in the burned out carcass of the helicopter. And then the other helicopter, 2 Israelis, 3 slumped over the seats, their bodies slumped over the seats, covered with blood-stained linen. And a huge headline, Jews killed in Germany again. Now, I speak perfect German. I did speak perfect German too in the past. This again, I didn't get. Wait a second. I get it. The Jews were killed again. And I asked my father, I said, what happened with this terrible thing, what happened in Munich? And he cut me off. He said, look what the Jews, what they do to us, the Germans, again. Whenever they are around, there's trouble, there's tzores. They need to be, we need to get rid of them. That the people, the world doesn't understand. They always make trouble. So the victims is perpetrators and the perpetrators is victims. I found that stunning. Because when the teachers at home and in school, we heard a completely different story that my father never touched, the story of the Holocaust. It was not called Holocaust yet, but the story of the murder of the Jews in the name of a German government, not as collateral damage of war, but in the name of a German government, and meaning that everybody was guilty who was a German. And I wanted to know more. And in school, we started to talk. We heard for the first time, Auschwitz, Majdanek, Treblinka, 6 million murdered because they were Jews. And I was shocked. I went home. I remember my father We had an evening talk about how the day was, broke bread together and had a snack. And I said, Dad, I could never call him Dad. I could only call him Vater, father, very formal. I couldn't kiss him. I couldn't hug him. It was a very strict relationship. Father, what happened? We talked about the Holocaust in the school, about the murder. My father looked at me. Holocaust? They call that Holocaust? It's all a lie. Your teachers are communists. It never happened. So I was caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, my teachers told me what happened. My father told me what didn't happen, or that they're lying, and I didn't know how to navigate this area. Truth or false? Somebody's lying. And I decided to read everything I could about that time, everything. And the more books I read in German, in English, in French, the more I had this sinking feeling my father's concealing something. And I wanted to know. I wanted to know the truth. For whatever reason, something motivated me. I wanted to know the truth. And I knew my father was a raging alcoholic. And as a child of a raging alcoholic, you understand 3 phases during the day. The phase 1, when they were looking for a drink, or at least he was looking for a drink, he was restless, irritable, and discontent. Phase 3, he was drunk, you couldn't talk to him. But phase 2, the twilight zone, I call it the Schicker zone nowadays, I make it up. That was the weakness where he could manipulate him, could get money out of him, and ask him questions. And the answers came out in 3 phases too. So I tried to condense it. During the first phase, Bernd, whatever allegedly happened in the East, we, the Wehrmacht, didn't do it. It was all the SS. Now, there was horse manure. I didn't know that is nonsense, because I found pictures, even after his death, multiple pictures that depict him sitting, in the one infamous picture, sitting next to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the beast, in Russia in 1941. And when the head of an elite unit, commander of a tank unit, sits together with the head of the beast of the SS, that was only for one purpose: securing the area for mass murder. So he knew something happened. And this was something I never forget him, that he never told me the truth. Second phase of answers came out. Well, allegedly something happened, but when civilians were killed, they were partisans that didn't have a uniform but weapons, and therefore we could kill them, and everything is according to the Geneva Convention. Well, I asked him a rhetoric question. I said, do you want me to believe that 1.2 million children perished in Auschwitz, in Treblinka, in Majdanek? They were gassed, their bodies burned, their ashes scattered on the killing fields and the bins and in Birkenau and Auschwitz. This is, nobody can believe that. So you have to try harder. And then one night he was completely drunk, totally wasted. And he said, look, Bernd, you belong to this weak generation. You're not warriors anymore. You don't understand that we did the world a favor to get rid of the dreck, the vermin. These are not humans. This is garbage. And the world should have given Germany a Nobel Prize because we dealt with the garbage a final blow, hopefully. And that was the end. That was the last straw that broke the camel's back of trust with my father. I didn't want to hear from him anything anymore. I was disgusted. And I asked my teacher, a former Jesuit priest, how do I deal with that? He said, Bernd, we need to make amends. How do I make amends? Do you mean to the Jews? Yeah, I don't know Jews. I never met a Jew. The only thing that I was told about Jews, that Jews killed Jesus. Obviously, that's wrong too, I know, but how should I do it? I said, well, I belong to a progressive wing of the Catholic Church. We inviting from Israel in a project that's called Neve Shalom, Jews and non-Jews, i.e. Arabs, to travel together to Germany and find peace and understanding together by understanding how each one is living. And we always need a German participant in order to offer the opportunity to talk about Germany. And so for the first time, a few weeks later, I met Jews. Now you can imagine, I was 18, they were 17. When we come together as young people, the last thing you want to talk is about politics. The first thing you want to talk about what food you like, what music you like. I like the Israeli girls a lot. Nothing wrong with that. So I was not purely spiritually motivated. I have to leave it like that. And she told me, look, Tacheles, and Israeli girls are like that. Tacheles. If you want to want to go out with me, sort of, you have to visit my parents in Israel. And I said, absolutely. I was a great Schwitzer. I do that. There was a tiny little problem. I had no passport, no money. But when she left, she sent me letters, and I was highly motivated to travel. And I got a summer job, got some money together, my first passport. and traveled in 1979 to Israel in October 1979. And I arrived in Haifa. I took a trip hitchhiking to Munich. Please don't do that, or your grandchildren not do it. Crossed the Alps by train to Ancona, the Adriatic port city in Italy. From there, ferry, sleeping on deck, not a cruise, and arriving in Haifa at an agreed upon time early in the morning. And when I saw the Carmel Mountains literally arising from the ocean, from the Mediterranean, and this beautiful morning, I got all choked up because that is unique, fascinating. And on the other hand, I got anxious. What happened if somebody would recognize my name in context what my father did? But it all was wiped out away when I met her in the harbor. She embraced me, said, let's go to my parents' apartment, or house, you called it. And we drove up to the Carmel Mountain to Neve Sha'anan, which was at that time a working class neighborhood. And her parents were standing outside. Her father, a burly man, he was working in the port of Haifa, very muscular. Her mother, also from Poland, both a Holocaust survivor, didn't know it at that time. And they took away my rucksack, my packs, and guided me into, as if I'm the holy Mashiach, guiding me in a house, and said, look, you sleep in this room, we all get together in the other room, but you're our guest, what do you like to eat? And I was stunned. And for dinner, the first dinner, I was tired and stunned, chit-chatting with me in Yiddish, and my girlfriend tried to translate it into German, English. And suddenly her father looked at me and said, if you want to speak German, if I tried to speak it too. I haven't spoken it for a long time. And asked him, how did you learn German? He looked in my eyes when you raised this, when you took showed me the tattoo on his forearm, on the left forearm, and said, ich war in den Lagern, plural. I escaped Auschwitz. I survived Auschwitz. I survived the death march. I stayed in Germany in 1948 in the DP camps, displaced person camps, and came to Israel. And I had to learn myself that not all Germans are monsters. But I want to know, do they teach you? Do they make you understand what happened? And I looked at him, I don't think we know everything. I was already shocked. In first time in Israel, first time in a Jewish home, first time in a home of a Holocaust survivor. What will happen? He put his hand on my shoulder and said, let me show you a place where we can both learn. And 2 days later, he took me to Yad Vashem in Yerushalayim, the Holocaust Memorial. And he guided me to that time, the old exhibit, guided me from the exhibit, holding my hand and explaining me every station. And in the end, I was emotionally a wreck. I was crying, I was physically sick. How can that be that these people, quote unquote, I mean, in a positive sense, these people can forgive me as a German, invite me as a guest, rebuilding their families, rebuilding their professions, and rebuilding an old country anew? There's something unique, some strength in them. I would like to know what makes them tick, so to say. On my way to Germany, I pondered the question, how do I find Jews? Little problem in Germany. At that time, about 65 to 70 million people lived in West Germany. Among them, about 20 to 25,000 Jews. Most of them left after the displaced person, stayed in Germany after the displaced person camps were closed. And you couldn't get into Jewish communities in Frankfurt, Berlin, Munich. They were hermetically sealed off. Armored personnel carrier was in front of each synagogue. Police heavily armed because there was the terrorism by the Red Army faction, a German terrorist organization, by the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, by the Libyan. It was a mess. But I found a little tiny synagogue or a community in my hometown, which was called Israelite Cultural Community, not even Jewish community, a cultural community. And the building, you got access to the backyard, hardly, with no guides, no nothing. You need to figure out how to get there. And there was this glass door. I knocked at the glass door. An old man opened the door, looked at me suspiciously and asked me, was willst du? And I must have rambled something and that he found comfortable to let me in. I said, come in. He thought I'm a student that had a project and he was not feel threatened by me. So I walked to the corridor and it was a very dark corridor. The walls were covered with black granite plates. The black granite plates, they were engraved names. And in the corner, there was a red light. I said, what is this? What is the Ner Tamid, the eternal light? And these gold plates represent, the names represent each and every Bamberg Jew who never came back from Theresienstadt. All of them about 1,300, all gone. And then he all guided me into his office, which was a hot summer, fall day, was hot, in windows closed, curtain drawn, no air condition, no fan. And he was sweating. He took off his jacket and his short white sleeve shirt, very pale skin, made the number tattooed in his forearm, very prominent. And he looked at me, das here, das ist Auschwitz. My name is Itzhak Rosenberg. I was liberated when I was 14, survived Auschwitz. And what do you want? And I told him my story. He said, well, that's a very serious story. Do you want some books to read more about it? I said, no, I read everything I could. I want to help. Help? How you mean help? I want to help you doing something. Yeah, man, you know what you want to do? Yes, I want to make, I cannot make up what my father did, but at least I can try. Well, let me tell you one thing, nothing is free in the world. And as Jews, you have to understand there are some kombinot that we're doing. First of all, you be my Shabbos goy, and I help you to teach. And both things will equal out, so there's no financial transaction involved, and we can do it legally. And I said, what is a Shabbos goy? When you explained to me what a Shabbos goy was, or is, going with an Orthodox Jewish community, had to go prepare food in the kitchen, turn on the light, make coffee, tea, and warm up the food. And it's like I said, look, when you there on Friday, try to be invisible. You know, it's difficult in the synagogue because this is our little world. And some of the members of the community, barely 30, they don't like goyim in their world, strangers, because they have enough goyim outside. So let me handle it. And of course, in the first night, on the Friday, the members of the community came in for Shabbos. Several were very loud and said, "Was macht der Goy dort?" And it's like, "Der alte Kackers, let them talk. I handle it. Just do what you have to do." So I came every Friday, every Saturday, week by week, month by month, holiday by holiday. I absorbed the mannerism. I absorbed the liturgy. I absorbed the language. I absorbed this whole being Jewish in as close as I could because it was affected me in a positive sense. On the other hand, I distanced myself from my family of origin. And I came to multiple breakouts, but the major one was when Christmas fell on a Friday night. Now, Christmas in an Orthodox Catholic family, I can play it like a script. Very, very important holiday. My mother took us to the church. Holy Mass was read, then prayer, and then coming back to home, eating lentil soup and carp, symbolic for Catholic Christmas. And then we waited for my father ringing the bell. He was in the huge living room with his massive oak doors. When he rang the bell, my mother opened the doors. We walked into, I remember this beautiful Christmas tree, real Christmas lights, and my father standing next to it in his finest dark suit with the Knight's Cross around his neck, singing festive Christmas hymns. I didn't attend that session because I was in the synagogue. When I came back on Saturday, my father and my mother were yelling and screaming and crying together. Where were you? You destroyed all of our preparations. We celebrated as a family. I said, let me tell you one thing and one thing only. I refuse to sit at the same table with somebody who's pretending to celebrate the birth of Christ with a Knight's Cross around his neck, blood-stained Knight's Cross, and with blood on his hands. I don't want to stay here. And my father looked at me, raus, get out. Well, there was a little problem, kein Geld. Even though I was in the second to last year of medical school and I had a scholarship, sort of, I needed some extra money to make it through. And I never told anybody in the community about it. I never asked for money either. And for whatever reason, Itzhak, maybe, or whoever told him, a member of the community who never talked to me came to me and said, "Du bist der Goy." Yes. Amazing after 5 years that you know that. And dein Name is Bernd. Your name is Bernd. Yes. Hör mal zu, listen, deine Jacke ist schmutzig, deine Schuhe sind schmutzig, alles ist schmutzig. Your jacket, your shoes, your pants is schmutzig, is dirty. Buy new stuff and give me 100 marks. I was stunned, insulted, and then giving 100 marks, which was a lot of money. So I walked over to Itzhak and I said, Itzhak, Aaron gave me 100 mark. What? Aaron gave you 100 mark? He's a company, he doesn't do that. He's very stingy. Did you ask him at least for 200? That was your opportunity. I said, why? I said, come on, this is a joke, sit down. You still don't understand what make us tick. We live, many of us are alive, and many of us even could have a normal life. I married a wonderful German woman who converted to Judaism. We have a beautiful life, but still for me, it's sometimes difficult to connect emotionally to the past. Aaron, we have no idea what happened to him. We know one thing from the Red Cross, that he was in Auschwitz, but that was all. And whatever reason Aaron sensed that it was the end of his life and he never talked to anybody, he talked to me and told me the entire story, what happened to him. And he cried like a baby. And part of the story was that, touch it very briefly because it's really ugly. He was a surviving member of a Sonderkommando in Auschwitz. These were the Jews who herded the other Jews when they came from the train cattle cars into the showers, as they called them, gave them a plastic card and said, "Be taking your clothes, you're taking a shower," and then on the other side, with a plastic card, they'd identify your clothing. Of course, it was a ruse, and the doors were closed, hermetically sealed. From the top, SS through a Cyclone B. When the yelling and screaming stopped, it was not 3 minutes. He said sometimes 15. They opened the doors. The Sonderkommandos had the gas mask on, pulled out the bodies. Any valuables were removed. The bodies were burned. The carcasses were crushed, and then the remnants thrown in the pits next to the crematorium. And therefore that they gave 90 days reprieve, alcohol, women, whatever they wanted. And if you, unfortunately, the next group came in, they were gassed. Aaron survived. When Aaron died 6 months later, Itzhak called me and said, "You have to come to Bamberg. Something bad happened." Aaron died, and I came and said, "What do you need to do?" "Well, we need you for the Cheva Kadisha." I knew what a Cheva Kadisha was, the burial society. I said, "I know I'm not a Jew. I cannot do that, but you're one of us." So he took me to we prepared this body, Aaron's body in the Bamberg's Jewish cemetery. The next morning we buried him, and Itzhak walked towards me and gave me the book and said, "This is the Kaddish on this page, say it." I said, "Itzhak, I'm not a Jew. You are his best friend." And I said a Kaddish, and that moment I crossed the line. I knew that's it. A few weeks later, I asked Itzhak, "I want to become a Jew." Itzhak said, "Are you crazy? This is what I showed you in the beginning. You don't need to have that. You're a righteous person. You're one of those that we adore. You don't have to be one of us." I said, "I want to." I said, "Unfortunately, I anticipated what would have happened. That could have happened quickly, not less quick. But I send you to a rabbi in Frankfurt who will literally will pay us the train. I will pay the hotel. I pay everything. But don't come back with these crazy ideas." Well, I met the rabbi. He agreed with his friend, Itzhak Rosenberg, whom we know very well. He said, "I will teach you, but I will not allow you to convert. We don't do that. Definitely not in Germany." Well, I've met him 2 years, every month, by telephone or virtually. We didn't have it, but personally. And in March 1986, he gave up because I always nudged him. I said, "Look, there will be a session of the Beit Din in Trier in Germany, and I will put your name on the list. But it's no guarantee that they will take you or will select you or whatever. There's many buts, but they require from you already a commitment and statement to your faith." One involves a little plastic surgery. I don't want to talk about it. It's not the nose. It had to be done in an Orthodox hospital in Basel, Switzerland. A few months later, I was presenting myself to an Orthodox community in Metz and did an Orthodox mikveh, in a mikveh of this Orthodox community. A rabbi performed the blessings. And then on December 1986, I presented myself to the rabbinical court, and it was like an inquisition. I'm sorry to say that, but there were like 6 rabbis dressed in black hat on, very seriously looking, sitting on the podium, and I was sitting down on a chair. And remember, the chief rabbi was a very strict person, said, "I don't convert Germans if out of guilt. I want to understand why a German like you wants to convert without guilt. And we have all the references and we know you. Everybody knows you, but you have to work harder to convince us." And I convinced them, because when they came back from a session at Yun, I had to stand up, and the chief rabbi said, "Are you ready?" And in Hebrew and then in German, read the conversion certificate and told me, "You're a Jew now. The name is Dov Ben Abraham. And what do you want to do?" I said, "I will go to Israel." "Why?" I said, "I don't have money to donate. I'm a young doctor. I don't have much to offer until I get a career going, but I want to serve in the army, and if necessary, die for it." And that's what I did, not the dying part. I was immediately recognized by the Israeli embassy in Bonn and the Sochnut, the Jewish agency in Frankfurt, to fit into the category of the law of return. In January the 7th, 1987, I got a free ticket, one-way ticket from El Al, from Frankfurt to Tel Aviv. The night before, I said goodbye to my friends in the synagogue, and Itzhak told me, "You didn't tell goodbye to your parents. You didn't go to the house. No, do it. You cannot choose whose parents you have." And I tried to say goodbye, but my father was yelling and screaming, my mother crying I should not get in the house, and I left. So I came to Israel on the night of the 7th, January 1997, and was assigned to a kibbutz. From there, 6 months later, with a little bit of Hebrew knowledge, I was assigned to a hospital in downtown Tel Aviv, the old Ichilov. From there, after a year of getting my German license up to Israeli par, was a rotating internship. I was immediately drafted into the military because a volunteer to do that even before I had my passport in my hands. And I was assigned to a basic training officer school and then sent to the Shachim, the occupied territories or the territories. And it was October 1988. The first Intifada broke out in Ramallah, and I was there because the basic training camp and the officers further officer training was part of it was in Beit El. Beit El is squeezed between Ramallah and the settlement of Beit El, and both of them didn't like us, neither the settlers nor the Arabs in Ramallah. And we were in full combat gear. And the commanding officer said, oh, this is your Rofeg Dudi, your physician in the unit. His name is, doctor, you have to change your name. Nobody can read that. So what is your name? I said, Dov Ben Abba. You Dov Dubik. He is your commanding, he is the doctor. And here I was standing in front of Israeli recruits with my uniform, with a fully battle gear, weapon, everything, backpack, the identity that I'm an officer and a medical officer. And I was standing there and said, if they find out that I'm a fake, that I'm a kind of a Nazi in drag, I cannot talk to anybody about that. I literally tried to throw my pass into his virtual closet, slammed the door shut and tried to throw the key away. Well, that didn't happen. It was a bad mistake because years and years later, my son Tal asked me the simple question, Dad, who is my grandfather? And I told him. And he looked at me, that's cool. Let me tell in school, my friends. No, please not. That's between you and me. Well, needless to say, that happened that they had a 3 weeks after I talked to him, or 4 weeks after I talked to him, a family history day. I was not there in the class, but I was called to the school because he raised his right hand and said, and my grandfather was a famous Nazi, not good in a Jewish school, didn't recommend that. And I was called to the principal's office. The rabbi was there, and the principal said, your son, Dr. Wollschlaeger, told us a verdrehte Geschichte that your father was a Nazi. I know there's terrible things happening at home. You get divorced, money issues, maybe just blows off steam. No, that's the truth. The rabbi looked at me. What was that? That's the truth. Well, come with me. I thought he wanted to kick me out. No, he took me to my son's class, said, this is a story that everybody has to hear. And tell it, doctor, I can't do it. And he was right. The weight that I burdened me so much, a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I closed this circle of life. I tried to close it again, finally again, in order to live normally ever after. And I decided in December 2004 to go back to Germany and to visit my parents 20 years later. And well, the only place I could find them was in the cemetery because they were long dead. My father died 6 months after I emigrated. He has a will that I am not his son, he shouldn't carry his name, should never visit his gravesite, and never visit, of course, his funeral. My mother died 10 years later, and they both were buried in a lot of the family grave of the Morris and the Wollschlaegers. And when you go into Bamberg, hopefully one day, you find the cemetery, you find a Christian and a Jewish cemetery together, just divided by a wall, because Jews and Christians lived together for all hundreds of years. And when you look to my parents' grave towards the other side, you see the wall that separates a Christian from a Jewish cemetery, and the broken gravestones casting their shadow across the wall to certain times of the day, though. And I told my son, look, the shadows of history, we cannot escape. And if you never dealt with the shadows of history, you even look at your grandparents, rest in the shadow of history. What I did, I stepped out of the shadow, looked back and tried to learn my lesson, that it never happened again. Move forward with the conviction that I want to be part of that never again. And that's what I'm doing. And my father probably indirectly taught me something that he didn't intend me to understand, is number one, that words of hatred have consequences. And when these words of hatred left unchallenged, and they fall on the fertile ground, the mind of others. They sprout into deeds. If these deeds prevail, habit will form. If these habits prevail, social characters or characters evolve, and that they determine then social norms. And that means that normal people considered the murder of Jews as normal because it was the norm. That was normal. When I asked, did you see anything? No, we didn't see anything, which was a bloody lie. But they, in the same sentence, they said, well, we just did what everybody did. So that is the problem. If in the beginning, if you don't start to raise your voices when words of hatred are being used, that is the beginning of the breakdown. That's we call the post-truth, pre-fascism phase. Then an important issue that always happens, Jews were considered to be as de-individualized. No, they have no depersonalized. They have, this is not Abraham and Sarah, this is not Moshe, this is Abraham and Sarah. They don't have any other name but them. So de-individualized, then they were depersonalized. While Moshe and Abraham, they are very dangerous people. Look at them, what they do with, they kill children, they eat the blood-stained matzah. These are bad, bad people. And then comes the demonization. We need to kill them because they're not part of the human race. And if you think I'm just crazy and had too much of Manischewitz a couple of days ago, I don't drink Manischewitz, I don't drink alcohol, so be advised. I'm concerned that we are regressing. And therefore I'm speaking more and more. Not about politics, forget about that. But our society as a whole, we refuse to interact in a civil way. We refuse to discuss things in a civil way. We refuse to accept each other with different opinions. We're going back into the time of the past. Words have consequences and words lead to terrible things. That's the reason why I continue talking. I mean, I'm not illusional or delusional that a little bit of talk, everything will be hunky-dory and we dance to horror. No, but at least pay attention what's happening. But it's not only anti-Semitism, it's anti-everyism. If it's anti-Muslimism, whatever you want to. We need to stand up and say loud and clear, hatred has no room in this country. Hatred, if other, they need to be aware, whoever does that, that we will be countered. But we are running a very, very slippery road that accelerating more and more. We have white national Christians. They call this white Caucasian Christians. What they are is just terrorists. They won't kill any Jew and anybody who's not white with pleasure. And they have the guns and they have the training. So I don't want to scare the heck out of you, but mindful, be mindful. All right. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak. And I'm saying allow me to ramble. I'm happy to answer questions. And again, toda rabba.
Sorry, I had muted and I did not unmute. Thank you very, very much. It was certainly mesmerizing, fascinating life that you've lived. And
I'm not dead yet. I'm continuing.
Well, correct. You're not. Correct. And I'm sure that there's some questions in the chat. And Joan Cooper, would you like to step in?
How did you give up Jesus? Is that the question?
Yes, I think that is one of the questions.
All right. I'm happy to answer that. I never gave up Jesus. Jesus was a Jew, clearly a Jew. Just he pursued another form of religious expression than the other Jews did. So I have neither positive or negative things about him, and I'm not against him. People always ask me this, are you now against Jesus? No, I understand how he ticks. I understand what kind of circumstances he operated in. Brave man. He paid with his life, his faith and understanding. But I'm not a Christian anymore.
I have my own question, and we are all, first of all, thank you. Your talk was mesmerizing and very touching, and you're a very brave person. What do you attribute the rise in racism that we are all seeing to?
That's a very difficult question to answer, but I will try. We are living in a virtual world. That happened in my practice, the same thing. People don't look at me and talk to me. They just show me screenshots that I have this, that I have that. People don't articulate anymore and talk to each other. They don't talk to each other. Everybody's trying to talk somebody over. People sitting in a bubble, self-created bubble, where they only read and see and listen what they want to read and see and listen to. Don't step out of the bubble, have their own created universe, have solutions in search of a problem instead of problems that seek for a solution. And that, of course, what happened in the United States on the 6th of January this year was the attack on a democracy. That was typical what Hitler tried with the Reichstag in 1933, attack on democracy. And we have to be very strong as Jews, non-Jews, Muslims, but as United States American citizens of this great country to make sure that it never happens again. So that's a part of the, hopefully, of the explanation I can give. But we have, America has the largest number of national socialist group, well organized, well armed.
Thank you for that. Why did you leave Israel, and when did you go to Miami?
Well, that's another complex issue. Let me try it like that. I always wanted to go to the Golden Medina, and that was just I married an American. Do it? No, it's not. I married in Israel, and during the Gulf War, 1990 to 1991, I was in January, actually 1991, I was in a rescue unit in downtown Tel Aviv from Friday to Saturday to mitigate the impact of missiles, and people needed to find out if there are chemical gases in there. And I belonged to a unit where chemical and biological weapon, we were experts. So my wife said, look, you don't study anything, you cannot function, you cannot be a degree in residency training. And as a doctor, I want to go back to home. She's an Israeli American, and I want to stay close to my father and my mother. If you want to stay here, stay here. Of course not, that was my only family. So I came to 1991 to the United States with a conviction that I'd do 3 years training, residency training, and then I would return. Meanwhile, unfortunately, our marriage fell apart. We had 2 children, and the children make me stay, going back and forth to Israel. I do until recently, 2 or 3 times a year. But that's my arrangement.
Are your children in Israel, or your children are in Miami?
In Miami. They live in
And
Miami, but then they were in Israel and in Germany, of course.
okay, and one of the other questions, is your wife Jewish?
Yeah.
Or is your former wife Jewish? Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what are you, Reformed? Do you consider yourself Reform or Orthodox or conservative?
Well, what I'm going to say will upset you. So
What does it matter?
All right. It upsets you because I have to use an example, which is pretty cruel. Do you think on the ramp in Auschwitz, anybody asked if you're an old Jew, a Reformed Jew, an Orthodox Jew, or ultra-Orthodox Jew? No. You were a Jew. You died for that. So we need to unite, not divide. And said, we as Jews fight together, and if necessary, die together. But we not let ourselves be separated, even in death. That is a provocative thought, but that's the I feel comfortable in an Orthodox Sephardic community very much because I know the liturgy. I don't feel much comfortable in the Ashkenazi Orthodox environment. It's a little bit coldish, I mean, emotional wise. And I'm adulterated as an Israeli Jew, and I see myself as such. So I'm a Jew to the best I can do.
I agree with that. And again, my own question, are you, as a convert, are you recognized by the Hasidic community as a Jew?
I actually, let me give you an example. 99.9% of those quote unquote Israelis that I met during my journey were actually embracing my decision. Specifically, when I served in the army, specifically when I was willing to fight in the war or in the war. I remember one of my soldiers, Milohimnik, a reserve duty officer, he said, look, Bernd, you have time to talk. We have, nothing's happening. Let's go to the kitchen. I know you must be a convert. He said, why? Because you're so ferocious. I said, what do you mean? Look, when you convert to Judaism, you must have a screw loose. If you then go to Israel, you must have a total screw loose, but that you fight and willing to die for us, you're my man. You're one of us. So the 1% of Hasidic that tell me that I'm not a Jew, it's very, very small number. I have never reflected on that as a problem.
Okay. Next question. Germany for a long time obviously did not want to speak about what happened during the war. So your lack of knowledge, as we know, was not unusual. Why do you think what do you think turned them to want to speak about what happened?
Well, let me separate that in brief. Germany after 1945 was shattered, destroyed, nothing and nada, with exceptions like in Bavaria, some all places, but Berlin, Frankfurt, Hamburg were completely shattered. And Germans started to literally, out of the ashes, they tried to rebuild in a new society and literally didn't look back, they tried to look forward. What happened in the past, we don't talk about it. 1955, the then German president Theodor Heuss gathered the surviving members of the attack on Adolf Hitler and his surviving family members from the 20th of July 1944 and honored them in public. That was the first thing, honoring them. Then came the Auschwitz trials in 1961 to 1963 in Frankfurt, which showed to the world and to the interested public what really happened, and that we unveiled the ugliness. And everything what you talk about, what we talk about Auschwitz, that came out. And then the murder of the Israeli athletes in 1972, Germany woke up and said, we need to do something more than we already are doing. And they do it honestly. Not everybody is honest, but they do it honestly with a lot of compassion and passion. And they deserve to be respected. They have now, of course, in 1989, the whole wave of East Germany's population came. It was free, quote unquote, and they were succumbed to the most ruthless propaganda that there was. And they had to be educated. So it was evolving and is evolving. And I'm very positive what Germany is doing, and Germany is doing the right track, is on the right track.
Okay. In light of the events that have unfolded in the US during the past several years, where we have seen the rise of white supremacy and the experience you've had with those who were and remain National Socialists in Germany, do you believe these individuals can change their minds and hearts? What is the road forward for the US in combating this movement that, if clearly following the experience of the Nazis in Germany?
Well, National Socialism in Germany is poo-pooed. There is a common consensus from right and left that we not accept National Socialism ever anymore. Consensus. So if it comes from the top to the bottom, and of course there are neo-Nazis in Germany too, but they're far outnumbered by neo-Nazis in the United States. This is a country here that is soaked with neo-Nazi groups, which are very well trained, very well financed, and very determined. We just were lucky that the 6th of January was more bloody than it was, because the 6th of January was a decapitation strike. Decapitation strike means the executive, i.e. on the president at that time was in the White House, his vice premier and the head of his vice president and the head of the House of Representatives were in the building. If they would have been killed, he would be the executive for the years to come. This was a decapitation strike, very well trained, very well. And when I looked at the videos, I said, well, they're behaving and moving like in the military strike tactics. These were skilled operators. This was not spontaneous outburst. This was a long planned effort to do a decapitation strike, destroying the democracy.
Okay. How do you think that we should handle the Holocaust deniers?
Unfortunately, I have to tell you, don't talk to them. No, seriously, you cannot talk to them.
You can't change their minds, I guess.
They're zombies, as Paul Krugman called it. They're zombies. You cannot talk to them. The only thing that I talked when I had encounters were because of my name, I was asked by a patient, "Oh, you must be a German." I said, "Yeah, well, let's see what it comes now." "Oh, you guys invented Hitler." I said, "What was that?" "Invented Hitler? What do you mean?" "Well, you love Hitler?" I said, "You think you need some big ketamine and a good psychoanalysis, because it's garbage. Don't you see I'm a Jew? And I have bad news for you. I'm not only a Jew, I'm an Israeli, and I was a member of the combat unit. So get the heck out of here before I wake up and train on you." So that you can say that when you have chutzpah in your own practice, but do not talk to them. You cannot convince them. They're aggressive. You have to solidify a block of people who are against National Socialism and convince them to stand firm against these terrorists who they are. But don't talk to them. They can be dangerous.
Okay. Are you concerned that the Biden administration doesn't fully understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, I don't talk about politics. I know about policies. Policies, yes. Let me just put a tip in there. In order to make any kind of things happening in the Middle East, you need to learn how to play four-dimensional chess. This is not a place where you roll and sit and make peace. From Republicans to Democrats and back and forth, this is a place that is real crazy. You need to understand first, listen first, and then when you move one chess game, the other will be losing. It's very, very difficult. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And so I think every president who tried, kol hakavod, but this is tough, tough work, and please stay engaged and try whatever you're trying to do, because this is difficult. When you read, reading Israeli newspapers and watching Israeli TV, when you see how they argue, it's far more complex than saying X group is good for Israel, Y group is not. It's far too simplified. It's tough. I'm not sure we should never give up, by the way.
Mhm. Okay. Is your story known in Germany? And if so, have other children of Nazis been encouraged to pursue a similar journey as yours?
Well, I don't know if I'm known in Germany. I hope not so, but well, I'm just joking. I'm known because I had given lectures in Germany in different places, in schools and Catholic communities, Christian and Protestant communities. I mean, mostly non-Jews. And I was amazed and humbled and moved to tears how Germans changed. I'll give you one example. I gave a presentation in a school in my hometown 5 years ago. And sitting in a circle, there were about 10 students, very relaxed atmosphere, 14, 16 years old. When I finished my story, it was silent. Then one girl said, I don't understand. I said, oh boy, that was, maybe they don't understand my German. No, she said, why should we consider the Jews as different? They're like us. Why do we consider Jews as different if they're like us? That is a simplified statement to show how much work was done to narrow the distances. But people understand each other in different cultures. I was moved to tears. That's just an example how people can change and will change.
Do you go back to Israel, or do you have to go back to Israel to vote in their elections?
I wish I could go back to Israel more often than I can do now, because everything is closed now. Slowly, the flights are getting back on track. And I will try to catch in before this year's end 1 or 2 times to Israel. I have been working or will work on a few projects that I want to come to fruition. So I'm very closely related to Israel. My friends are there. It's, for me, of course, easier to manage Israel because I speak the language.
So you have voted there?
Voted? No, and actually, I didn't participate in the last 4 or maybe 5 or maybe 6 votes. I could, but I haven't done it. And because you have to go there personally and make sure that you are registered. There's a sentence, the Middle East is a fascinating place as it relates to democracy. There was an Arab political analyst, an Israeli Arab political analyst, and said, well, what is different to the Jews and us? Well, the Jews enjoy 4 elections in 2 years. We didn't have an election for 15 years and have this monster as a head, Mahmoud Abbas, a dictator in place. That cuts it all. They like our democracy. They means Israeli Arabs, because they know specifically now that democracy, you can make a difference, and they're making a difference in the United Arab List. I'm not against it. I'm citizens of this country. And on the other side, they separate themselves from what happened in Palestinian Authority because there's no democracy. A friend of mine who is an attorney in Amman, Jordan, told me we would like to have, a few years ago, we would like to have the Jews coming back and to occupy the territories. I said, why? We just extricated ourselves. Yeah, because at least we know with whom you're dealing with. So if a tank breaks his fence or breaks my road or runs over my car, I can go to the commanding officer and file a report, and they will deal with the report, and I get money back. If you do that with the Palestinian police, first of all, they beat the bejesus out of you, and then they tell you, get the heck out of here, otherwise they kill you. So they like us. And they want to be part of the Israeli society if they're being respected in their religion. And that's happening right now.
Are you an American citizen? Do you have dual citizenship?
I'm an Israeli American citizen. I gave up my German citizenship because I refused to serve in the German army and went to the Israeli army instead.
I'm just curious. Do you have family in Germany that you hear from? Do you have relatives that are still there?
I had two sisters. One sister unfortunately died 14 years ago, and I have a younger sister. She lives still in Germany. We're in regular contact with her, and she knows my children. My children know her. Visited her. They visited us. Yeah, we have a decent relationship.
I think that is the end of the questions. And again, unless anybody has any more, I on behalf of NCJW would like to thank you for this presentation and for who you are and what you're doing.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity that I could talk to you.
I have a question. Can I?
Yes, sure.
I wanted to know whether you speak in the United States to high school students. I think your story would be, part of the problem is people don't know. So many people in the United States are still not aware. It's news to them. And it would be valuable for you to communicate with them.
Well, that's a very important point. Now, I'm just one nebbish, one guy.
Yeah, but it could make a big difference.
And I go to preference to school. I went in the last, I don't say it because I'm a Schwitzer, in the last 14 years, 14 years, yeah. I traveled from Australia to New Zealand, to South Africa, Brazil, Latin America up and down, Canada, many different, United States, Germany, England. I tried hard, and I will continue trying to keep the message out. And I have these immense privileges to see people in Jewish communities in so many different shapes or form, and see people who are not, speak to people who are not Jewish, and send them a simple message. It's not about Jews. It's not about me. It's about humanity.
Right.
And it's about humanity that we interact with each other as humans. The most touching impression that in a speech that I gave, Rabbi Lau, the former chief rabbi of Israel, was present. A man of Malach. He is a former Holocaust survivor, and he speaks at Auschwitz whenever he can. And I remember him standing there next to on a podium in Auschwitz, next to the crematorium, and said, God was here, and he cried what his children were able to do against each other. He tried so hard, God, to give us the directions how to live a good life, respecting each other, and we disregarded him, and he cries. It's not if there's no God, it's that we do not accept and do not integrate and absorb in the wording of absorb the guidance to be better people. We have as Jews the choice, like anybody else. Do you want to listen, or you don't want to listen? Do you have the lashon hara, the bad tongue, or lashon hatov? That is something that we need to decide. Nobody will abdicate our responsibility to make a decision. But everything, and coming back to Judaism, why I converted too, everything that you need to know is written in the Talmud and the Torah. In human behavior, not how I build a computer, in human behavior, and how humans, when they get astray, horrible things will happen. So that was the most moving experience that I had, and I understood God is here, and I listen to him. In a sense, I can listen to him and do the best what he or she will want me to do, in a human way.
Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you so very much. I don't know if you've been able to see some of the comments in the chat. So many people have been saying thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for certainly sharing a very exceptional story. I do think you've moved many people this afternoon, and I totally know that you are doing lots of good in this world.
I'm humble. Thank you.
And we really appreciate your life story.
Thank you. And if you're in Miami, give me a call. We don't go to South Beach.
Well, we will. We will. I made an error earlier, and I want to correct it. Thank goodness for messaging, because one of our good members did correct me. Earlier, under Good and Welfare, I noted that Flo Sarfin had passed away. She has several years ago, but what I was supposed to say was condolences to the family of Nan Badian, who co-chaired literary study groups with Flo many, many years ago. So I just wanted to make that correction for everyone. It is a magnificent day outside, and I hope that many of you will get a chance to go outside and enjoy the sunshine. And we look forward to seeing all of you again at our May events. Thank you for coming. And Karen, thank you for bringing Dr. Bernd Wollschlaeger to NCJW.
Later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hate throat.